Welcome to you all. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. We are doing yet another one of our New to Islam chat show to hear the stories of those who decided to become Muslim and why they decided to become Muslim. And today with me I have brother Shaheed, also known as Nathan, from the UK, and he's going to discuss, we're going to hear about his story of how he became a Muslim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. So, as I've already mentioned, your name is Shaheed Nathan. Maybe you can give us a bit of introduction about who you are, where you're from, a bit about yourself before we go into all the other parts.
Excellent. Yeah. So as you mentioned, my birth name is Nathan. I grew up in a place called St Albans in England. It's quite a relatively posh environment. It's not a very stressful environment. And I grew up in a family, Caribbean family. As you know, Caribbean families are quite attached to their religion, their faith, like Christianity, so on and so forth. So I was brought up in that type of environment. I went to a religious school. We didn't eat before praying, all that sort of stuff. Every day we went to the church and things like that. And I had quite a positive role model in my family, my grandfather.
Okay.
My grandfather was one of those individuals who was well learned. And he always used to encourage us to learn and to know what we was doing and know why we do this and know why we are in the positions we're in. So he would encourage me to learn more, study more of the Bible, this, that, and the other. So that was kind of my background and my history.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then, it's interesting because you're coming from a fairly religious, Christian background. Mm-hmm. So then, how did you go from that? I mean, what's the first? I don't know, not experience. Maybe it was the first experience, but what started to push you towards Islam? How did that end up happening?
I think the first experience for me, as I mentioned, was my grandfather. When I came of age, there's something in Christianity is called confirmation. 16 years old, you go and you learn the Bible and you confirm the faith that you follow. And my grandfather sent me, but when he sent me, he told me to be, one of those people who are open-minded. Learn yourself, look at the evidences in the text. And I used to find things in the text and just say to my granddad, look, I want to ask this question. Can I ask this question? It seems like Jesus came with a message that, it's quite universal and he's talking about someone else and this, that, the other. And he said, yeah. He agreed. So I kind of lost my way for a bit because I was a bit confused. I didn't know which way to go because my grandfather would say, Jesus is not the Son of God. But I'll say, but I'm learning it, But he'll say, no, that's not the case. So I says, what is the case? So he'd just say to me, look, find your own way. So I left the church and I actually was somewhat in the middle. I believed in God, but I didn't believe in the pathways that I was following to go down that route. Then interestingly, I had an experience with the jinn, we call them, yeah? The other creation that Allah's created. And I went to the church and I said, look, I'm experiencing these things from spirits and so on and so forth. The priest was very, dismissive and said, we don't believe in that sort of stuff. Maybe go to the doctors. I went to the doctors were like, what, maybe you've got something going on, take some medication. I took it, I threw it in the bin. I knew what I was going through wasn't, it was real. I was taught to believe in this sort of stuff, So that experience led me to believe deeper in my faith. And then one day I had friends, and this one friend of mine would avoid my house because I had my own apartment. He'd avoid my house in the day and he'd come in the night. And then when he came in the night one day, he said, Assalamu alaikum to someone outside my house. I said, why are you never coming to my house in the day, man? He said, Ramadan. So I said, oh, okay, and I started to ask questions and so on and so forth. And that was the catalyst for me to kind of, start quizzing and asking those type of questions.
Okay, so you've obviously had this Muslim friend. He's Ramadan opened your eyes, so you started to ask questions. Then what happened? What was the deciding factor that you knew that you knew Islam was the truth, and you said, I have to become a Muslim?
It was the fact that this friend of mine, I went to primary school with him, and I never knew about Islam. All I knew is that, Eid, there's a day that, the Muslims in my area, they have a good time, whatever else. And generally speaking, Muslims, I never know anything about it. So when this friend of mine I've had for a long time, he started to speak to me, I had a question, he answered it. Had another question, he answered it. I had another question, he answered it. At every question I came with, he had an answer. He had an answer from the Quran and the Sunnah. So he had, this is what we learned from the Quran and this verse, and Allah said that, and this. And he's just a general person, right? He's no one not really learned. He's just a general average Muslim. And every single question I asked him, he had an answer, and it developed. And I knew this from some of the scriptures I learned from the Bible, that Jesus said, I have to go, for if I don't go, the Comforter won't come. And when he comes, he will speak of me. And when he comes, you all will be in a state of confusion, but he will explain things in detail. And when he comes, the religion will remain with you forever. So he explained this very, very, very eloquently. He mentioned, like, the coming of the Comforter, firstly, Ahmed, right? We know the word in Aramaic, Comforter, is Ahmed, which is the name of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And then, he broke it down like we have a whole surah called Surah Maryam. It talks about not just Jesus, the life of Mary and her parents and everything, So, and then he explained details of, miracles, like how the Quran knows about the embryonic development, so on and so forth. And just at the end of the conversation, he got onto, you have to believe in the angels, the jinn, and the human beings. And I said, oh, what's jinn? What are the jinn? He said they are a creation made from the smokeless flame of the fire. And they do this, they do that, they interact like this and that, the other. And I said, do they do this and this? He said, yes. I said, okay. At that moment, I was convinced, because he affirmed what I had been experiencing, where everyone else had kind of passed me around like, oh, he's mad, he's this, the other. So then he said to me, there's a surah, there's a verse in the Quran, and it's قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Now, at the time, I was obviously not a Muslim. I didn't understand the Arabic language. I remember the name Allah. That's all I remembered. So that evening, it started to happen a bit more intensely. And I remember saying, Allah save me. And the first time, I felt relief. The second time, I felt more relief. The third time, I felt like a new human being. And I woke up, and from that moment, I was living as a Muslim, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Now, a lot of things that people are apprehensive about is, if I become a Muslim, a lot of people, they realize or recognize the truth, and they say, if I become a Muslim, my social circle or my friends, my family, they're not going to accept it. So, how did that work for you?
That's a very good question. For myself personally, I was kind of the type of individual whereby I had my own 2 feet, So I wasn't too worried about what my family or friends would say, because I was kind of the one who was more dominant in the friend circle. But to say the least, it was like, how can I now share this with them, right? So when I embraced Islam, I would do my best to explain to them, my family members and friends, what I had learned. And my dad was a bit, it was a bit difficult. But the one beauty about Islam is that if you enter into it correctly, I'm not saying I did, but it changes you as a human being completely, 360. So it changed me 360. So my father, who's been trying to raise me all this time in the way that he deemed fit, saw this son that he really wanted. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So he was like, he said some really beautiful words, like, if Islam is what did this to you, then it must be like, there must be truth in it. My grandma said the same sort of statement. She brought me a Quran and said, if this is the book that has changed you, then this must be the truth. Yeah. And so they started to accept, not necessarily embrace, but accept that this religion is making positive changes in me. Then my mum became Muslim, my auntie became Muslim, my cousin became Muslim, and so on and so on and so forth. Because the reality is, once the truth is brought forward, the person whose heart is sincere will hear it, and you never know what will happen,
Now, what advice would you give, first of all, to those people who are thinking about Islam, and they kind of know deep down it's the truth, but they're being hesitant? What advice would you give them?
The advice that comes to my mind, the first thing that comes to my mind is that if we believe and we accept, right, that there is a life after this life, and we believe and we accept that there's a creator who's legislated and given us guidance on how to live this perfect life, then the reality is, it doesn't matter what kind of hurdles we have in front of us. The reality is, we are individuals who will have to go through that journey our own self. So we have to kind of be a bit selfish and realize that no matter what's going on in our social circles, no matter what's going on in our family, this is a personal journey that we go on, right? That's the first bit of advice. And the second bit of advice I would give is that it's more of a story, is that I had before Islam, I was semi-professional footballer. I was a musician. I had a lot of money. I had my own apartment. I had trainers. I had Pradas. I had Gucci's. I had no happiness. But after the reversion, after that transformation, I found true happiness. And the reality is most people believe and perceive that if I make this transition, my life is going to become boring. My life is going to become more closed. But that's not the case. You become free and you become much more happier. And you become a person who can, accept and problems when they come about, and you actually enjoy those happy moments sincerely. So that's my little bit of advice.
It's interesting you said that, because we have a verse in the Quran that says, "Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub." Indeed, in the remembrance do hearts truly find like peace and serenity and contentment. So it's interesting how you said you had some of these worldly things, but you only felt kind of true contentment by becoming a Muslim.
That's it. That's true.
On a final note, what would you advise those people who have recently become a Muslim? What would your advice be to them as new Muslims?
As new Muslims, I would say that, attach yourself to the people who you see that are good in behavior, that have a desire to want to learn their religion. Because as a new Muslim, you're a bit confused, you're a bit here, you're a bit there, you don't know what to do, and so on and so forth. And the reality is we need to learn what it is that we are now chosen to follow. So I'll say that attach yourself to good friends, a good company, because it rubs off on you. If you're around good people, they will support you, help you, find a center, find a place where you can, ask those questions you might have doubts about, and go on the journey of learning. Because the more you learn and the more you taste the beauty of this religion, the more that your life becomes complete, and the more that you find happiness and contentment and joy. And share it with the world, man. Share it with the world. Find the way that you can share it, and the best way to share it is in your actions, in your behavior.
Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Also for the viewers, thank you for tuning in. And if you're one of those people who, deep down Islam makes sense, reach out to us on the social media that you can see. We are more than happy to answer your questions and guide you in the right directions. And we always say, when you recognize the truth, why not accept it? And I leave you with, as always, with the greetings of Islam, which are literally Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you.